Hello everyone! Today we're going to look at a sensational game played between Magnus Carlsen and Garry Kasparov back in 2004. At that time, Garry Kasparov was the #1 chess player in the world, holding an incredible rating of 2831. His opponent was the young Magnus Carlsen, who was only 13 years old and had a rating of 2484. Even at such a young age, Magnus managed to seriously test Kasparov's nerves in this game. The age gap between them was 28 years. While Kasparov held the #1 spot in the world, Magnus was ranked only around 700th. Don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's take a look at this game. Magnus had the white pieces, and he began with the queen's pawn, d4. Kasparov responded symmetrically in the center with d5. Then came c4. Magnus offers a pawn sacrifice. That's the queen's gambit. But black declines the gambit with c6, reinforcing the center. White continues with knight f3, developing the kingside knight, and black replies with knight f6. Next, knight c3. The knight takes an active post, adding pressure in the center. Kasparov plays e6, creating a solid pawn wedge in the middle of the board. Instead of rushing to castle or develop the kingside, white plays bishop g5, calmly developing pieces and pinning the knight. Black plays knight d7, reinforcing the knight on f6. Now, if white captures on f6, black can safely recapture with the knight. White responds with e3, strengthening the central pawn on d4 in preparing to develop the bishop to e2, followed by castling. Kasparov strikes back with queen a5, launching activity on the queen side and pinning the knight. Suddenly, the unpleasant move knight e4 is looming, which would attack the pinned knight on c3 as well as the bishop on g5. Carlsen calmly plays knight d2, taking control of the e4 square and at the same time unpinning his knight on c3. But Kasparov continues the pressure with bishop b4, threatening to capture on c3 and win the pawn. Carlsen spots the danger and plays queen c2, reinforcing the knight on c3. Now if black captures, white will simply recapture with the queen. Kasparov castles short, bringing his king to safety, while Carlsen slightly lags behind with bishop e2, preparing his own castling. Noticing that white's king is still stuck in the center and vulnerable, Garry strikes immediately in the middle with e5, breaking open white's pawn structure. Magnus castles short, just like black. Immediately, black captures on d4, opening up the e-file. It's not favorable for white to recapture right away, because after the exchange, black would take back the pawn on d4 and the bishop on g5 would be hanging. Once the bishop retreats, black could push b5, securing the extra pawn on d4 and playing with pressure. But Magnus had already seen this kind of idea before. Instead of rushing, he plays knight b3, attacking both the queen and the pawn on d4. After the queen retreats, white is ready to capture on d4 with the pawn. Black answers with dc4, but then white calmly recaptures with the bishop on c4. Now we see that white has been left with an isolated pawn on d4, but in return, he enjoys a lead in development. All of white's minor pieces are active and well placed, while black's position is far less comfortable. The knight on d7 blocks its own comrade on f6, the bishop on c8 is completely stuck, and even the rook on a8 is unable to join the game. In this position, black chooses the plan of a5, aiming to push the pawn further to a4, gain space on the queen side, and at the same time chase away the knight from b3. Carlsen responds with a4, stopping this idea. Now black plays queen c7, while white calmly brings the rook to the center with rook e1. Kasparov continues with h6, kicking the bishop on g5 and also giving his king some luft. The bishop retreats to h4, and now white is already ready to reposition it to g3. But Kasparov plays bishop d6, directly attacking the pawn on h2. If white were to respond with bishop g3, black could easily exchange on g3 and then enjoy a positional edge, putting long-term pressure on white's isolated pawn on d4. Magnus, however, finds another solution. Instead of bishop g3, he plays h3, simply moving the pawn out of danger. Kasparov's move is knight b6, attacking the bishop on c4, but allowing white to take the knight on f6. Magnus takes advantage of this opportunity and slaps the knight on f6, and after the knight on c4, the knight on e4. Now Magnus begins to show some tactical magic. White's queen attacks the undefended knight on c4. If the knight simply retreats, white can capture the bishop on f6, and after black recaptures with the queen, there comes a nasty bishop fork, winning the exchange on f8. So, according to best play, Kasparov finds bishop h2, moving his bishop away from the attack square on d6, while giving check h2. White calmly steps aside with king h1 and then comes knight e6. Black sacrifices the bishop on h2 but wins the knight with a discovered check. Magnus simply recaptures the bishop with king h2, and after knight e4, white blocks the check with bishop e5, covering his king. Now, wherever the queen moves, the knight on e6 is hanging. The only move for black is knight d6. But after queen c5, white threatens to take the knight on d6. Kasparov offends with rook d8, the only way to keep the knight alive. But then white plays d5, pushing the pawn forward and preparing the move nd4, bringing another piece into the game. Kasparov plays queen d7, stepping out of the pin on the knight at d6. But now black gets some freedom and plays knight f5. Carlsen immediately captures the pawn, attacking the queen. Black's only reply is to take on c6, but in that case, they lose another pawn. Then comes rook e8 and rook d1, seizing control of the open d-file, and at the same time targeting the queen. Magnus plans to bring his second rook to the open e-file, so he plays rook fe1. Despite white's dangerous development, black still has a path to equality. Kasparov finds the best move, bishop b7, attacking the knight on c6. White must save the knight, so after knight d4, queen d4, we reach a position where white has one extra pawn on b2. However, we now see opposite colored bishops. White has a dark squared bishop, black a light squared one, a setup that often leads to drawage tendencies. After queen d4, white threatens to capture on g7. Kasparov calmly defends with queen g6, protecting the pawn, and at the same time creating a mate threat on g2. Magnus doesn't miss it and plays queen g4, offering a queen trade. Black agrees, and after the exchange, white recaptures with the h-pawn, leaving himself with doubled pawns. Now comes bishop c6 as black begins to pressure white's queenside pawns. White defends with b3, holding the pawn on b4. Kasparov pushes f6, driving the bishop away from its strong central square. After bishop c3, black trades a pair of rooks. Next, bishop d5, targeting the b3 pawn. White defends with rook b1, and then Kasparov activates his king with king f7. Carlsen responds with g3, and black doubles rooks with rook b8. The game continues, b4 is played, and after the exchanges on b4, Magnus is still fighting with his extra pawn. But Kasparov blockades bishop c4, preparing to transfer the bishop to a6 and stopping white's progress. White pushes again with a5, but black is ready, bishop a6, fixing the pawn. Carlsen strengthens with f3, supporting g4, but Kasparov brings his king closer, king g6. White answers king f4, but then h5. After gh5, king h5, Kasparov activates his king further, and rook h1 brings white's rook into play. The maneuvering battle continues. Black's bishop moves to b6, then the rook infiltrates with rook b2, attacking g2. White defends with king g3, but Kasparov switches targets with rook a2, painting down the a5 pawn. Carlsen protects it with bishop b6, but after king f7, black simply waits, asking white what he can do. Magnus fries rook c1, planning to invade the 7th rank. Kasparov calmly replies with g5, and after rook c7, king g6, keeping everything solid. Now comes rook c6, pinning black's pawn on f6 and threatening bishop g4, which would win it. But Kasparov has everything calculated. Bishop f1, brilliant, covering the weakness and at the same time preparing counterplay. Suddenly, black's rook swings over to the second rank and white's pawn on h2 is under fire. The only way to defend it is bishop f2, but this gives up the pawn on a5. After bishop a5, the position is completely balanced. With opposite-colored bishops and equal pawns, the game is absolutely drawn. And indeed, the players agreed to a draw. At the time, this was a real sensation. A 13-year-old kid managing to hold the world's #1 player, Garry Kasparov, to a draw. After this game, Kasparov even worked with Magnus for a while, helping him in his development. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching and see you next time.